I'm Dashiell Sterling, and if you're reading this, prepare yourself, because I never imagined I'd be recounting the day my wife, Talara, looked me straight in the eye and asked for my blessing to sleep with another man. It was as if she was requesting permission to borrow my car or pick up a specific brand of artisanal tea. But that's precisely what happened. And I didn't erupt. I didn't even shed a tear. Instead, I presented her with two unthinkable choices. And what unfolded next? Neither of us saw it coming. It all started with a forgotten digital note. Yes, a simple faded digital memo. I found it nestled deep within the files of her old art tablet, the one she usually kept tucked away in her studio drawer beneath a scattering of dried paint tubes and half-used sketchbooks. I wasn't prying, believe it or not. I was searching for a specific stylus. But there it was, pinned to a date from 3 weeks prior. Marcus Thursday, the Gilded Liar. That single digital line in Talara's distinct, flowing script felt too deliberate to be innocent. I stood there for a solid minute, my mind buffering like a frozen screen. Who outlines a hotel rendezvous like a chore on a to-do list? Who plots a betrayal with such casual precision? I didn't confront her immediately. I wasn't ready for the familiar deflections. It's for a client collaboration, or, you're always imagining things, Dashiell. So I waited. I let her believe I was oblivious. I started observing. That very evening, she returned home humming a tune, a light, almost celebratory sound. She brushed a quick kiss on my cheek, poured herself a glass of chilled white wine, and said, "Can we talk?" I replied, "Of course." She settled onto the plush sofa across from me, her legs gracefully crossed, and without a tremor in her voice, without a flicker of shame, she stated, "I want a night away with someone else. I need to experience something different, just once." She articulated it as if asking for a break from routine, as if it weren't a thermal detonator dropped in the middle of our custom-built living room. My lungs simply refused to draw breath. I wish I could tell you I stormed out or delivered some movie-worthy scathing retort, but all I managed was a choked, "Why?" Her answer was quick, almost rehearsed. "Because I feel like I'm fading," she confessed, "and he makes me feel truly visible." So my silent suspicion had been validated. She gazed at me with those almond eyes glistening faintly, expecting me to understand, perhaps even applaud her candor for speaking it aloud. Instead, I rose, moved toward the expansive, raw wood kitchen island, and poured a glass of water I had no intention of drinking. When I turned back, I laid out two options for her. Option one, she could have her night, but she would never see me again afterward. I would be gone by dawn. Option two, she could stay, and we would begin anew, but only after she severed all ties with him, completely and unequivocally. She offered no immediate reply. What she did next was far worse. And that's when everything truly began to unravel. She didn't flinch. That was the most devastating part. After I presented her with the two stark options, either leave and lose me, or stay and excise him from her life, she merely sat there, blinking slowly, as if I had offered her a dinner menu rather than a moral precipice. I waited. My hand clenched the edge of the granite countertop so fiercely that the cool stone bit into my palm. She tilted her head, then, as if a third, unoffered choice had materialized in her mind, she asked, "Can I have a couple of days to think about it?" I should have refused. I should have told her that when your partner needs time to choose between fidelity and betrayal, the choice has already been made. But I was weak. I nodded. 48 hour, I granted, my voice flat. That was me still playing the role of the patient husband, the understanding one, the man who quietly endures and never makes a scene. Ready to learn what happens when silence speaks louder than words? That night's sleep was a stranger. I lay beside her, feigning rest, as she showered in the adjacent ensuite, picturing the water washing away whatever vestige of guilt she might have felt. I stared at the ceiling, attempting to pinpoint the moment things shifted. Perhaps it was when my architectural projects demanded longer hours. Perhaps it was when we ceased holding hands during our evening strolls, or when our shared dinners devolved into separate screens. But then, a sharp memory surfaced. I had offered to attend her most recent gallery showing, and she dismissed it, claiming it would be too chaotic and not really my scene. That must have been his night. Marcus's. The next day, she maintained an eerie normalcy. She brewed coffee, inquired if I preferred almond milk or cream, even placed a casual kiss on my cheek. I nearly recoiled. I watched her move about the kitchen in that oversized artist's smock she favored on weekends, and a stark thought solidified. She believes this is a negotiation. She thinks I'll capitulate. So I began my own preparations. I backed up my critical files, secured my passport, discreetly moved some personal savings into an account she didn't know existed. I wasn't planning retribution. I simply needed control. Because when someone you love asks if they can betray you gently and expects commendation for their honesty, that's no longer a conversation. That's a declaration of war. On the second night, she arrived home later than usual. I asked if she had reached a decision. She sank slowly onto the sofa, met my gaze squarely, and stated, "I've made a reservation for Saturday night." That was it. No, I choose you. No, I'm sorry. Just that. I nodded silently. She couldn't have known it then, but she had just made both choices simultaneously. Because by the time she returned from her night with Marcus, she would discover exactly what her decision had truly cost her, and not just from me. Something else had already been irrevocably set in motion. Saturday arrived with a startling swiftness. I'd always believed time stretched agonizingly when one was anxious or heartbroken, but this felt different. It rushed at me like a freight train I couldn't disembark. I observed her getting ready that evening, as if she were attending a celebratory gala, not committing an act of profound betrayal. She wore an emerald green silk gown, one I hadn't seen in years. I used to adore that dress. It draped exquisitely, making her look exactly like the woman I'd fallen irrevocably in love with. But that night, it seemed like a costume, donned for a role in which I had been silently replaced. I didn't inquire about her destination. She offered no details. I merely stood in the hallway, my arms crossed, as she meticulously adjusted a pair of intricate silver earrings in the antique mirror. At one point, her gaze flickered to mine, and she murmured, "I'll be back late. You don't have to wait up." As if I were a distant roommate, or worse, a benign guardian. It was a casual cruelty, delivered without a hint of awareness. The moment the ornate front door clicked shut behind her, I sank onto the edge of our bed and stared at the polished floorboards. I didn't cry. Those tears had been shed long ago. I simply felt hollowed out, as if a vital part of me had been surgically removed from the life I'd meticulously built, and someone else was poised to step into the void. But I wasn't going to let it happen without a trace. No, my own preparations were complete. Earlier that week, I had reached out to someone I never thought I'd speak to again. Cameron, my older brother. We'd been estranged for years, a lingering bitterness from a complex family inheritance. Long, convoluted story. But when I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. Cameron, a former investigative journalist, believed fiercely in justice, even the kind that felt inherently messy. "You're not torching her world," he warned, his voice low. "But you sure as hell don't have to leave it perfectly manicured for her either." He helped me meticulously pack essentials, move critical belongings into a secure storage unit an hour outside of town. But most importantly, he helped me install a discreet camera. Not to spy on her night. I had no interest in that level of self-inflicted torture. No, the camera was strategically positioned in the main hallway, angled precisely at the front door. I needed undeniable proof, not for legal proceedings, not for a formal divorce decree. I just needed something irrefutable, because a fragile part of me still couldn't truly believe she would go through with it. Asininu, what would you do if you needed undeniable proof of the unthinkable? But she did. At precisely 12:23 a.m., the front door swung open. I was already miles away by then, nestled in a booth at a quiet, obscure roadside cafe 2 towns over, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee and waiting for the discreet buzz from the app on my phone. And it came. She returned alone, her auburn hair slightly disheveled, her makeup subtly smudged. She didn't look jubilant. She didn't even look particularly remorseful, just profoundly tired. She drifted to the living room, checked her phone, then leaned back and stared blankly at the ceiling. I observed her through the feed for exactly 2 minutes. Then I closed the app. I didn't need to see anything more. She believed I would be sound asleep in our bed. She believed things would magically revert to a semblance of normal, with a few carefully tucked away secrets behind a polite practiced smile. But that's when she saw it. The note. I had folded it precisely and placed it on her pillow, her wedding band resting beside it. And that was only the beginning of what I left behind. The note was neither poetic nor melodramatic. It contained no Shakespearean allusions, no cries for vengeance. I kept it stark, chillingly direct. I wanted her to grasp the full weight of her choice without giving her a single phrase to twist, manipulate, or argue against later. It read, "You chose your night, I chose my future. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I meant what I said. You do not get both." Next to it, her wedding band glinted, resting precisely where her head should have been. Not on the dresser, not hidden in a drawer, but right there on the pillow, because I wanted the absence to strike her first, even before she absorbed the words. Later, Cameron informed me that she had attempted to call me 15 times that night. The calls never connected. I had already changed my number. She sent 2 desperate emails, both subject-lined with a simple pleading, "Please," and one rambling voice memo where she sounded more bewildered than genuinely remorseful. But I didn't listen to it for days. I wasn't ready to hear her voice again. I was too engrossed in rediscovering the quiet rhythm of my own thoughts, unburdened by her noise. I had relocated to a secluded cottage nestled near Birch Hollow. It was remote, peacefully quiet. There were mornings when I'd wake with a jolt, momentarily believing I was back home, that she'd roll over and murmur something about needing coffee. Then reality would rush in, cold and sharp as ice water. I'd remember that she had traded our decade of vows for a single night with a man who likely didn't even care enough to ask her favorite color. What shocked me most wasn't that she went through with it. It was the alarming lack of effort she made to stop me once she fully grasped the gravity of my resolve. Perhaps deep down, she thought I'd eventually cool off. Perhaps she believed she could still navigate this ship once the storm had passed. But I wasn't bluffing. I had been a ghost in my own marriage for months. Now I was learning how to exist as a ghost in someone else's world. 1 week later, a handwritten letter arrived. She always believed paper conveyed more profound meaning. It carried a faint trace of her perfume, a cloyingly sweet synthetic floral scent. In the letter, she didn't apologize for the actual night itself. She apologized for how it made me feel, which is arguably the most rehearsed and utterly useless apology anyone can offer. She claimed she thought we were stronger than one night. That's when I knew she still didn't understand. She still believed the betrayal was merely the act, not the meticulous planning, not the emotional rehearsals, not the months of silently drifting into another man's emotional orbit before casually asking permission to finally collide. She concluded the letter with, "I don't know who we are now." I reread that line countless times. I longed to write back, "We are nothing." But instead, I allowed silence to speak its truth. Meanwhile, Cameron suggested we go to a local rustic pub just to get me out of the cottage. I was in no mood for idle chatter, but I desperately needed something to disrupt the relentless loop in my head. And that was the night everything shifted, because someone at that pub recognized her name, and what he told me next chilled me to the bone. It turned out my wife hadn't merely had one night in mind. She'd been lying to me long before she even asked for permission. The pub wasn't remarkable. Dim, amber lighting, floors that occasionally adhered to your shoes, and a jukebox that still inexplicably played obscure, scratch country ballads no one requested. Cameron ordered us both something dark and potent. I didn't object. I was simply grateful for the ambient noise. For once, I didn't want to think. I didn't want to feel. I just wanted to sit in a space where no one knew me as the man who got left behind. But fate, it seems, has a particularly cruel sense of humor. About 30 minutes in, Cameron struck up a casual conversation with a gruff-looking man seated 2 stools down. His name was Oberon, mid-40s, a closely shaved head, too many faded tattoos to count. He worked in commercial lighting and apparently handled installations for local art galleries. My ears, despite myself, perked up. When he casually mentioned Talara Levian's gallery, I froze. I hadn't heard anyone speak her name aloud since I'd departed. It sounded both hauntingly familiar and utterly foreign all at once. Cameron, either oblivious or subtly testing me, asked if Oberon knew her. Know her? Oberon chuckled, a raspy sound. Yeah, man, that gallery is practically her second home. Or third, depending on who you ask. That final phrase sent a cold tremor through my gut. I subtly turned towards him, careful not to appear too desperate. What do you mean? I asked, my voice surprisingly quiet. Oberon took a long swig of his drink and shrugged. It's none of my business, really, but people talk, especially when the same guy keeps showing up at every opening, hanging around long after everyone else has cleared out. Marcus Thorne, I think. You know how it is. Artist types, all emotion and inevitable mess. The words hit me like physical blows. I had spent weeks painstakingly convincing myself that her betrayal had been a momentary lapse, that she'd been swept up in some fleeting fantasy and acted impulsively. But now I was hearing confirmation of something far more insidious. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a single, isolated night. This was a slow-motion collision, and she had been steering the wheel the entire time, her eyes wide open. I didn't press for more details. I couldn't bear to hear about how she looked at Marcus when she thought no one was watching, or whether they'd ever been nearly caught before. I simply nodded, mumbled an excuse, and retreated to the men's room, where I sat in a stall for 10 minutes, desperately trying to regain control of my breathing. What would you do if you discovered the betrayal was deeper than you ever imagined? Later that night, I walked alone by the misty lake near the cottage. The wind was a biting whip, and the indifferent stars above seemed to mock my smallness. I recalled how Talar used to say, "The sky always looks lonelier in places without towering buildings." She was right. But perhaps loneliness was the unavoidable price of clarity. I realized then that I hadn't simply lost a partner. I had lost the fundamental version of myself I used to be when she loved me. The man who painstakingly built a porch with his own hands because he believed it would become the cherished backdrop of their forever. That man I knew with chilling certainty no longer existed. Still, a stubborn ember deep within me refused to let her walk away without knowing the full, crushing weight of what she'd done. Not with dramatic theatrics, not with petty cruelty, but with surgical precision. She had asked for honesty. Now I was going to deliver it to her, unvarnished and undeniable. And I knew exactly how. The next morning I drove back to the house, not to see her but to leave her something. A final message, one she couldn't possibly ignore, delete, or pretend to misunderstand. I slipped it into a dark wooden box and left it prominently on the front step. No name, no return address, just a simple, elegant seal across the top and a sentence etched into the grain. You said you needed one night. This was mine. Because inside that box wasn't just my ring or the farewell note. It was something else, something that would shatter the fragile illusion she had meticulously constructed and force her to confront the raw truth she'd buried for months. The box wasn't ornate. It was a weathered, dark cigar humidor I had owned for years, tucked away in the attic with a few other mementos I once considered sentimental. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure why I chose it. Perhaps because it looked like something you'd dinner rather than gift. Perhaps because what I was about to present her with wasn't a gift at all. Inside, I carefully placed the note she hadn't properly absorbed the first time. Then underneath it, I added a sleek USB drive. I had meticulously labeled it with her full name, not out of malice, but because I wanted her to understand it was meant specifically for her eyes. No ambiguity, no room for misunderstanding. The contents of that drive weren't cruel, merely carefully curated. Audio snippets from the rambling voice memo she had sent me after her night away. Bits of her trying to rationalize it to herself, recorded and painstakingly edited down to just the moments that starkly revealed how premeditated it had all been. I also included several screenshots, messages from her email to Marcus, effortlessly retrieved from our shared laptop before I departed. She hadn't even bothered to clear her drafts folder. I wasn't seeking to expose her publicly. I hadn't shared them with anyone but her. But I desperately wanted her to see herself the way I now saw her. Not as a woman who made a singular mistake, but as someone who had lied with an unsettling, practiced ease. The final file was a high-resolution photo taken from the front door camera the night she returned home. She stood in the hallway, her designer heels clutched in her hand, eyes puffy, mascara smudged slightly. Not glamorous, not confident, just used. I believe that single image captured the unvarnished truth better than anything else ever could. I didn't linger to observe her reaction. I placed the box on the porch early that morning, while the street was still veiled in pre-dawn darkness and utterly empty, then drove away without a single glance backward. I anticipated feeling triumphant, perhaps even a little vindicated, but instead I felt profoundly hollow, as if I had just closed a chapter so impossibly heavy it had irrevocably cracked the spine of my entire story. Later that day, Cameron texted me one cryptic word. She called. I didn't respond. He followed up with, "Did you leave her something?" I replied, "Only what she earned." That night, she emailed me again. The subject line read, "What's left to say?" I didn't open it. Instead, I poured myself a stiff drink, sat by the roaring hearth behind the cottage, and stared into the mesmerizing flames. There's something haunting about watching fire slowly consume wood. It's deliberate, relentless, and ultimately final. I imagine that's precisely how our marriage had ended. Not with one cataclysmic explosion, but a quiet, insidious burn she never believed I would truly feel until there was nothing left but ash. 2 days passed, then 3, then the silence finally broke. Not from her, but from someone entirely unexpected. An unknown number texted me with a message I never anticipated reading. "We need to talk. It's about Talara and Marcus." That was the precise moment I realized the story was far from over. She believed she'd closed the door on our past with that one reckless night. But some doors don't stay shut when there's a raging fire behind them, ready to uncover the true depths of betrayal. At first, I dismissed it as some kind of error. The number wasn't stored in my contacts, and the message's tone felt oddly urgent, as if the sender possessed knowledge they shouldn't. I ignored it for a while. I wasn't in the mood to be dragged into further drama. I had played my part, drawn my line in the sand, and meticulously walked away. But curiosity, a cruel and persistent companion, gnawed at me, especially when you've just begun patching up the fragmented edges of your life. The message arrived again the following day. "I wouldn't reach out if it wasn't serious. You deserve to know what he's been saying. Marcus isn't who you think he is." That was the final push. I responded with a terse, "Who is this?" A few minutes later, a reply came. Her name was Harlow McIntyre. She identified herself as Marcus Thorne's ex-fiancée. They had been together for nearly 4 years, engaged for 1, and had only broken things off a mere 2 months prior. I stared at the text, my jaw clenching. 2 months ago. That meant Talari had begun her clandestine liaison with Marcus while he was still technically engaged. How many lies can one person tell before the truth inevitably surfaces? Harlow asked to speak on the phone. I agreed hesitantly, half expecting it to be a mistake or an elaborate prank. But the moment she spoke, I could hear the profound exhaustion in her voice, the kind of deep ache that only genuine betrayal can inflict. She recounted Marcus's pattern, explaining that Talara wasn't his first affair, not even close. Apparently, he had a notorious reputation for attaching himself to vulnerable women, particularly married ones. He would romanticize the secrecy, speak of liberating them from their dull, mundane lives. And once he acquired what he wanted, he would simply move on. Harlow had discovered old messages on his discarded tablet after he'd left it unlocked. She read me one of them. It was from Talara. "I'm terrified, but I also feel alive again. He doesn't look at me like you do. He looks at me like I truly matter." That single sentence made my throat constrict, bone dry. I remembered the way I used to gaze at Talara, afraid to blink, as if she were a masterpiece and I dared not miss a single detail. And somehow that had become insufficient. Harlow continued. Marcus had unceremoniously ghosted her without a shred of explanation. One day he was planning wedding venues with her. The next he was avoiding her calls and suddenly reconnecting with an old friend, which we both now knew was an outright fabrication. When she saw his name in a local art blog connected to Talara's gallery, she meticulously pieced it all together. She reached out not to stir the pot, but because, as she put it, I deserved to know what kind of man my wife had risked everything for. When the call ended, I sat on the cottage porch for a long, quiet time, allowing the frigid evening air to slice through the tangled mess of my thoughts. She had carelessly discarded a decade of shared life for someone who had already tossed aside his own fiancée like a forgotten sketch. And now that Talara had finally acquired what she so desperately sought, she was left with a man who had already moved on emotionally before her one night had even truly ended. But I wasn't finished. She believed the silence signified closure. She thought I had simply faded into the distance, a bitter, inconsequential memory. But now I possessed a new, undeniable reason to reach out. One final confrontation. I didn't crave revenge. I didn't wish to ruin her life or publicly expose Marcus to the world. I simply longed for peace. But peace, I'd learned, doesn't always emerge from silence. Sometimes it demands absolute clarity. So I sent her one last message. No venom, no accusations, just unvarnished truth. I told her I had spoken with Harlow. I told her I understood Marcus's manipulative game, that she hadn't been chosen because she was uniquely special. She had been selected because she was available, vulnerable, and willing. I told her I hoped that one day she would truly comprehend the profound difference. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't promise anything resembling reconciliation, but I concluded with this powerful statement. You asked for a night to feel alive. I took the rest of my life to genuinely live. She never replied, perhaps because she knew there was truly nothing left to say. Perhaps because, deep down, she had already realized she'd gambled everything on someone who was only ever passing through. It's been 6 months since that night. I still reside in the cottage, but it's no longer temporary. I've repainted the porch, replaced the old, perpetually leaking sink, and, most importantly, I've started taking photographs again, something I hadn't done seriously since before my marriage. Turns out I'm not half bad at it. I even joined a local photography collective, which is where I met Alara. She's thoughtful, quietly perceptive, and she laughs genuinely at my awkward jokes. Crucially, she has never once made me feel like I am an option to be weighed against someone else. We're taking things slow. Not everything needs to move at breakneck speed to be profoundly real. Looking back, Talara, in her own twisted way, gave me a strange kind of gift. Her betrayal fractured the very foundation of a life I believed was immutably solid. But in cracking it, she also forced me to rebuild, not from a place of suffocating grief, but from an empowering truth. And this time, I'm building something infinitely stronger. If you've ever been through something similar, remember, you are absolutely not alone. What's one pivotal moment in your life that felt like a devastating end, but ultimately turned out to be a powerful new beginning? Share your story.